All right, great, everybody. Hey, thanks for watching today. My name's Hunter Willis, and I've got Jay Leesk here with me, and this is Buzzkill, where we talk about some of the things that are kind of difficult for organizations to talk about, work through when it comes to the strategy and digital transformation. Today, we have Amanda, who's a guest on with us, and she's going to talk about her experiences in relation to the topic that we've been on here lately, which is applying governance to your data and collaboration systems. So, Jay, I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to you, and he's going to give us a little bit of information about what we're talking about today and give Amanda an introduction.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm really excited. So following up last week's conversation on governance and the value and also some tips on how you can get a governance program rolling coming out of the pandemic and as we try and normalize work again, coming out of that, I reached out to Amanda, who I used to work with as a federal consultant. And I said, look, I know you talk governance all the time. We'd love to have you come in and follow that conversation with some practical conversations. So Amanda, would you mind giving us a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Sure, no problem. My name is Amanda Musselwhite. Like Jay said, we used to work together. I actually got into SharePoint back in 2004 for an internal IT company that I worked with. And, you know, we were rolling it out. SharePoint was in its infancy, and governance was, even back then, a buzzword. And just kind of one of those things, I think that I started small, and as I moved into consulting, federal consulting, really we're looking to try and provide a structure with it. And so it's kind of been one of those things, once you get a skill tagged on your resume that says governance, it's what everybody pulls you in for. Thank you, Jay. So, but you know, I've been given the moniker the governance witch. And I think that kind of solidifies how people think of governance. It's not a positive thing. And really, I think what's important is trying to make it a positive thing and really show people that it's not negative policy or restriction, that it's the enabler for a process or a technology, you know, be that content management across legacy systems, be it knowledge management, be it what we're living with in the COVID quarantine, you know, really for governance to be what helps you thrive and helps the technology solve your business problems. So that's my spiel.
Yeah. First of all, the governance witch is a fantastic nickname.
Yes.
It's very fitting from just that concept of you're able to use magic to make this stuff happen. That's kind of what governance feels like when it. So I wanted to ask you. So when we were talking about last week, you brought up our conversation of the technology versus the ownership and the design of it. So I'm curious if you can elaborate what it was, because you were leaning more away from the technology and more on the ownership and the activity and the definition, right?
Well, I think that it's important for technology, like I said, to be there to solve a business problem. And when you look at governance, and when I write governance policy or governance documentation, I like to think of it as, here's the environment we're working in. Here's the technology that we're talking about. Define that. Who are the people who are affected? What is the policy that's in place, you know, over these people in this environment? And then lastly, I'm saving the best for last. I'm not saying lastly, least important. What are the processes that enable these people to work in this environment with these policies? So, not saying that ownership, you have to define that and let people know what their role is. Be this in a SharePoint environment, be it in Teams, you know, which is now SharePoint plus, you know, 3 and 4 other applications that Microsoft has layered in there with it. But whatever your technology is, you know, giving people the understanding of what they're supposed to be doing. Because a lot of times we roll out, as IT professionals, we're tasked with rolling out something new. And we don't make people feel comfortable using this technology. Every time we went from when we rolled out email, people, no, I still need to just call or walk over to somebody. Then we roll out SharePoint. No, I live in my email. I can't go out to a portal and click a link to share one document with somebody else. Now we have Teams where we're chatting about the document that's stored in SharePoint, and they don't understand. And we can't make everybody the tech expert, but we can at least let them know, when you don't know how to do this, here's where you go to find it out, or here's where you go to find out who can help you with that. And then once people feel more comfortable because they have the tools in place that provide them that information, they're going to be more adept at and more willing to, move into something new. So that's kind of, where I see governance. And you have to do the legwork behind the scenes. And I think you guys touched on this really well in the last podcast, looking at a governance board that are your executives or your leaderships, a small group that says, here's why we are using this technology. Here are the constraints that we're operating in. Here's what it's trying to achieve. But then also having what I like to call the governance committee, which says, okay, we are here to tell you how we do our work and what our pain is, and to be that feeder up to the governance board, your C leadership, your legal, to say, here's how we need to use it and where we see the shortcomings or any kind of pitfalls that we have.
So I have a question for you, Amanda. So what are some of the so like we've touched on in the past, some of the reasons it's really important to make it easy for users to be able to interact with this new technology as it's rolled out, as you touched on here, right? And we had a back and forth in a conversation in preparation for this, but like in the last episode, I talked about how, I kind of alluded to it and followed up with it, but just to reiterate the point that governance is never done, right? And these trainings and getting people to understand new technology and processes as they roll out is a continuing process, which is why, like you mentioned, right, these committees are so important. Can you talk about some of the ways that you have tried to get people on board with learning new technologies and some of the things you've actually done to like get people to understand why the governance processes that you have, as well as like, the getting the users on board with using new technologies in the right kind of ways?
Right. Well, I've done it in two ways, and one of them works in certain environments. So if you work in a very structured environment, be that a corporation that is very hierarchically structured, if you're working for any kind of federal or government entity that is very hierarchically structured, you can start at the top down. Leadership either says or leadership shows that this is the technology that we're using. So every announcement goes through Teams. Every document is not sent in email. It is uploaded to SharePoint and the link goes out. Because in those kind of environments, what leadership says goes, and you can't fight against it. And this works in some organizations, but in other organizations that maybe are more horizontal or less structured, more informal, then really providing people small, we talk about the low-hanging fruit or whatever, but just small ways that their life, that their daily work can be improved by following some of these processes or by adopting this new technology. It's got to go hand in hand with training. But if you give people one little thing that makes their day easier by using it, then they'll go, okay, maybe this isn't such a bad thing. Change is hard. Change is hard for people. And, whether they're adaptive or not, and they're excited about new technology or not, it's just, we get set in our ways and we feel comfortable and familiar doing something. So if you can provide someone to say, you know what, here's one way that I can make your life easier, then that's, kind of the carrot, whereas the stick works in the other, the other scenario.
I can definitely see how in a more civilian organization, the carrot needs to be what's in it for me, whereas in a more, we'll say, structured organization, not to say what, but where the boss, the general, the admiral, whatever, says this is how it's going to happen, then that's how it happens, right?
My mind was like an orgtatorship as opposed to an orgocracy, right? So.
And it's not all. I mean, people who work in those kind of environments too, they need a what's in it for me as well, and different, like I mentioned people who are your early adopters, who are tech savvy or tech energetic. They want, the neatest new gizmo or gadget or tool. People who say, this is how I do my work. This is how I've always done it. You've got to, as the implementer, ask why. And it's not necessarily because I'm challenging you, it's why do you do it that way? What about this process works for you? Because sometimes that has value. It doesn't make any sense to implement something new just because it's new. There's no point in rolling out something, be it a workflow, if it doesn't actually help achieve, a business goal or make something move a little smarter. And a lot of times I come in and I love my metadata. I hate folders. It's, what I've moved to. And it does absolutely no good to layer 15 different pieces of metadata on one file that every user has to implement. It's more work for them to save the file than it is for them to actually create the file that is their work product. And so they're so averse to it because it eats into their time. You know what? Use the folder. Sometimes we have to take those baby steps, just getting our users to say, I'm willing to go to this online collaborative platform, but I need to hold this little piece back. And everything has to be done in baby steps. You can't take a boulder and just push it down the mountain because it's going to snowball over people.
Well, so I was going to say, so we're in this unique time now, though, right? Where for a lot of people, that boulder got pushed and they didn't push it. It just got pushed, right? Yeah. And so one of the things that we've been touching on is this idea that no matter what situation you're in as an organization, you always have to have the idea of governance and data structuring and lifecycle in the back of your mind so that even as things do get forced like this, right, you're always at least taking notes to know what happened in a transition, or like, trying to continuously do research and keep in touch with users and your governance teams to understand what's happening in the organization so that you can continue to plan. We talked with you about a client that you've had in the past that is having kind of some issues with that in terms of like willingness to accept a governance strategy and kind of not really understanding the importance of it. Can you talk about that and how that could be, a problem for organizations that are having this change forced upon them, right?
Absolutely. And like you said, organizations that had already in place a robust knowledge management organization within them, content management strategy, records policies that they were following for whatever reason, whether it was pushed down from a legal standpoint on them, or they were, just lucky enough to have had that rolled out. They're in a good situation. They probably have documentation, some sort of governance in place that they can now evolve into this environment. If we look at, we talk about the proliferation of Teams over the last 3-4 months. Microsoft has made it, super easy for so many people now to have Teams, even though we're all disparate. There's face-to-face conversations. People are uploading things to chats. They've created however many teams that they wanted to. And now we have content behind the scenes in SharePoint sites, in private channels. So they might be in separate SharePoint sites. And no one may, if you're not herding these cats, what happens when we come out of this if you no longer have Teams? So you've now got to get your content out and back into another repository, or if you stay here and people realize, wow, this kind of dispersed work is actually working for us, we want to stay here. What does it look like? And how do we get a handle on where everything is and who owns it? So I think one of the most important things that you can do is not just to ring the bell and say, this is a problem, but coming up with 1 or 2 courses of action that you can take to someone in leadership, or someone else who can take things to someone in leadership and say, maybe we start to implement this process, is something that I've always found to work. It's hard to task somebody else to do something.
Sure.
So recognizing that there is a problem and at least coming forward with, why don't we identify who this belongs to? Why don't we identify any policy that we have, cyber, legal, records, that we may need to apply in this new structure, to this new technology? And then you can kind of bring everybody together in a collective, and you're no longer tasking them. Now you've got either your governance board, your committee, at least people who recognize the problem and can start from there. I think it's difficult, and not usually, like I said, the governance witch, I'm either doing magic or, I've got a long green nose. A lot of times you say, we need governance, and people, we don't have time for that.
Yeah.
We'll get to that when the crisis is over. By the time the crisis is over, it's too late, and we're at the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
So there are so many resources out there where you can, start looking at governance and start thinking, at least, what are the risks that we're taking working in this environment? If you can identify those and start with the risks and find, ways to mitigate them, then that's your first course of action. And then that grows into governance.
So out of curiosity, can you talk a little bit about where you have had a past customer who had the time to come up with the plan and implement it over, no rush, no immediacy, and what kind of benefits that they saw from following this approach?
I did have a previous customer, and we were rolling out SharePoint for them. They had SharePoint, and we were upgrading to a new version, and so it was a new farm. We weren't just upgrading in place.
Right.
We were migrating, so we kind of had a blank slate, and so luckily had, like you said, it wasn't an urgency kind of thing. We had the luxury of standing this up, and we were able to reach out by creating the governance committee and pulling people in from different parts of the organization. We were able to not stand up Amanda's SharePoint, because my intranet may not be beneficial to you, Jay, or to you, Hunter, to really talk with different parts of the organization. Obviously, they're all at the end of the day looking to achieve the same goals. They may have different responsibilities for doing that, but when you look at large business objectives, they were all feeding into that. And so we were able to, through that input, develop power users, and not just necessarily from a technology standpoint, but from a content ownership standpoint.
Right.
We were able to remove the responsibility for the technology from the IT department. And we were able to grow them within different parts of the organization, because it's a lot easier to know that, hey, the guy who sits 3 desks down from me is, knows about this. He understands SharePoint, or he gets Teams. He knows where I'm supposed to go with this. You have a relationship with that person. So if you don't know what to do, but there's already a power user close to you, that, builds within your community, rather than going, I'm going to put in a help desk ticket. They're not going to get back to me.
Right.
It's not going to be the answer I need, or I don't have time to read through the manual. That kind of thing. So you build the community organically as we were pulling people in and getting their feedback and their input as to what was important, but also then they were going back out into their business units and really being the champions who we needed to be out there in the field. And then also they are the sounding board. They then say, yep, we tried this and this is working for my division, or we tried it and it's not working for my division. Here's where we need a change.
Yeah, the Power of Champions program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if you would agree with the statement that it delivers enough return on investment for IT in terms of saving time and energy with dealing with things, that it's worth, putting major energy into developing power users for the organization that can do that kind of thing, right?
Power users and training, I think, are two of the most important investments that you can make. Obviously, developing a file plan, if you want to get back to, pure content management and those kinds of policies, that's important, but you've got to train your people, because otherwise you are spending your time and your money developing an IT team that is responsible for everything, and some sort of ticketing system or prioritization system for the rest of the organization to come to them and say, build this for me or do this for me, because it may be as small as upload this file for me.
Right.
Whereas if you invest in training and power users and champions, then you are putting that responsibility back out into your organization, into your different departments, where they are most familiar with their content and their processes. So if you can grow a responsible organization from a technology perspective, then you can allow them more responsibility within the technology.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because if you look at tools like the Microsoft Office stack, they are leaning towards enabling the end user and knowing that the business owner of the content knows what's best for that. So if you look at how they do permissions, when you create a team, you're the owner, which doesn't just make you the person in charge of the space from a business perspective, but from a technical perspective too. And it's kind of scary, but if you think about what they're doing, they're giving that person the right to say, these are the people I need to work with. These are the tools I need to be successful. And so it leads towards empowering those users, the power user or the champions, as an example, to making sure that they can do what they need, and gets it out of IT's hands. That's the whole point of having a system like that is you can't hire 75 new technologists to support it. So you have to enable them. Well, how do you enable them? You plan for how you want them to use the system and what controls you want in place. And that's where that governance plan starts to come into place. It tells them how to use the system, how not to use the system. And if you can pair that with technology, you can start to automate those controls so that the individual doesn't have to know your every bit of that plan as much too.
Exactly. I think a role that we haven't talked about today and that I think is very important is the sponsor role. And it leads into, I need this team, I'm going to create it, I'm the owner, and I have all of the technical responsibility for it. But sometimes the people who are, you need to have a sponsor role that says, here's what I'm creating, and I have the business need for it, but I am not necessarily the administrator behind it. So part of what I like to bring into governance, and a lot of that is discussion, and that goes back to governance is never done. It's going to evolve. So whatever you can start with, and then let it evolve, is the conversation, pulling in those sponsors to continuously remind us what we have these processes and this technology in place for. They are the ones, and even in your less structured environment, leadership is there for a reason. And so they're the ones saying, here's what our aim is, here's what we're trying to achieve. But they don't necessarily need to be the ones responsible for rolling out the tool. So that might be those other people who you're training so that they can quickly, make the changes. So much of what we do, technology has evolved so quickly, we are able to modify, be it a site, be it an intranet, be it a content repository, a workflow, so quickly now, if you have that capability. And so making sure that you've got all the feedback coming from your sponsor and also your end users, that is your biggest stakeholder base, are your end users. They may not be the people who are making the changes in your system, but they are the ones consuming everything that's in it. So, you need to look at all of those different roles and provide them a voice. And being able to have whatever that communications channel is, and I could go down this road for a while, but communications are one of the more important things that you can do to show people that we have taken this in. Here's where it did fit with our governance, be it from a policy perspective or an auditing perspective, and here's the output. Because you're not going to get user adoption if users don't feel that they have a voice in it as well.
And having a system to measure that adoption, right, and the success with these things is really important too. Have you experienced that in the past too, and kind of implemented a way to test the success of these communities and adoptions, kind of kept track of the number of power users and those kinds of things? And
absolutely. Now in Teams, Teams definitely has built in already so many metrics that can show you who's logged in, who's active. It goes back to a lot of the gaming theory and things like badges. People react well to this. People react well to being a champion, being a power user. If you get the little star next to your name, if you get whatever moniker goes along with that. And so, through a lot of these metrics that we on the administrative side can look at, being able to then go back out into the community and give people whatever badge they've earned, or the little tips and tricks that we do for things as small as scavenger hunts. I remember the first time I was introduced to the concept of, oh yeah, we're gonna have a scavenger hunt on the intranet, and you have to find where this is. And I thought, people aren't going to do this, and this is it's totally human nature.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I didn't think about that, but in terms of Office 365 and Teams, there is, like in the Power BI adoption pack, and then there's like Power Apps has like a little user adoption and some training app kind of things in there too, and like community success things where you can like reward people for doing stuff and give each other kudos. What were you going to say, Jay?
Yep. I was going to say, so there's, we shared it on our Twitter account recently, the On the Spot Twitter, but there is a package of scavenger hunts for Teams and Office 365. I forget exactly. I think it's the former founder of Cast, but it's just a really clever idea to get people to use the tools. And exactly like you said, like you're sitting there going, no one's ever going to do this. Yeah, maybe not everyone's going to do this. And yes, you're going to have a curmudgeon or three in your organization who are going to say, this is stupid. But a good percentage of your people are at least going to touch the first few items and start to learn more about your technology. And if you're mixing that in with your governance of why you want them to do things a certain way, they're going to start learning simply by following that scavenger hunt. It cracked me up when I saw it, and just to have you bring that up today made me laugh, because it's exactly what I thought when I saw it. I was like, this is great.
Pizza parties.
Yes, everybody does learn when they're eating food.
You put a pizza party
rolled that
reward out there, man. People go nuts. True story.
They rolled that out in Teams, it would be, absolutely the most cutting edge technology ever. And here, have a chat and get a pizza.
Yep.
Microsoft should pair with a national delivery chain to make that happen. That would be hilarious.
Yeah, that would be very amusing. I got to ask, so Amanda, we said this at the beginning, and somewhere in the middle it was repeated. I'm going to say it probably a fifth time. So governance is never over. And you are, amongst your many other skills, you often are the governance consultant for one of your customers. When you're there, it's very easy for them to rely on you to bring the best practices, to create the initial design that they have to approve, to start telling people how to roll it out, to help them modify it. But as you plan to roll off of customer engagements, how do you help your customers understand the importance of that long living governance document and the continued need to modify and plan and grow with your organization?
Part of it is with metrics, being able to show over time where things that we've done following the governance plan have been a benefit. So if you're looking at storage capacity, not creating digital landfills, and being able to show that by following life cycle processes, either for sites or for individual, content documents, that we were able to work within a certain amount of storage. And being in the cloud now, you get so much storage that may not be the button that you need to push in an organization.
Sure.
Storage, used to be a more of a limit than it was, but things like that, being able to show user engagement, being able to show lack of repetition, being able to show workflows that have been developed that have saved time.
Yeah.
That is what is going to get leadership excited about continuing governance, because if you don't do that, that's the return on investment that they're looking for from a tool. So if you show, here's the return on investment because we had this governance in place, then that is how you can keep people engaged. Also, when you can define the roles that people are playing in governance, so you have a governance lead, you've got your board, you've got committees. It is easier to provide the transition for somebody, because it's not just, all right, you're in charge of governance now, have fun.
Right.
When you can explain to somebody, you are coming in to fill this role and these are your responsibilities, and it's documented, then it's an easier transition. They understand, what they need to do, and so they can continue doing it.
Okay. Yeah, Hunter, you and another colleague of ours spent some time over the last year and a half or so creating a calculator on now it was related to our product, but still it was this calculator to show the return on investment in investing in governance automation, in the automation of these tasks, right? Same concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to the analogy I like to use for this is the dishes, right? When you first graduate or get out of college and you're out on your own and you get that first apartment, you find out very quickly like you have to do the dishes every day, right?
Yeah.
If you just stop one time, suddenly there's this giant pile of dishes. Or if you have roommates and they leave dishes in the sink, right? You've got this huge project. And very quickly, governance, you realize it's the same kind of a thing. If you don't take care of it immediately, it becomes a massive project that you've got to clean up. And now things are having to slow down. You're having to put restrictions on stuff because things are getting messy and you don't know what kind of information is where. And we've seen this. Jay and I have seen this firsthand. And Amanda, you've probably seen the same thing where they didn't have governance. They're kind of rolling along, and then somebody kind of looks at the security and risk situation, and they're like, "Whoa, got to lock it all down,"
Yeah.
And so with teams, what we've seen is like organizations will literally just turn it off, and then go through this cleanup project. So it's really important to understand that what you're doing is not just spending time doing stuff that nobody likes, nobody wants to talk about. What you're doing is preventing this clutter and this risk from piling up for the organization, because when you don't take care of it over the long term, number one, again, you create these you increase risk due to data exposure and due to content liability, etc. You're also making it much harder for people to find the right thing because there's tons of duplication and tons of similarly named content that's out there. People don't know which is the official thing to do what, right? And number three, with applications and workflows and all these kinds of things, it's about processes, right? Which process is the right process? Which one works the best? And is it organized enough to understand, how departments work together in a single process to make sure things move forward efficiently? So I think it's really, really encouraging to hear all the things you said, Amanda, and a lot of great advice from your experience that you've had there. It's really, this has been a really wonderful conversation.
Happy to have been part of it. Thank you so much for including me.
Absolutely. Amanda, if there was, I'm going to put you on the spot because I didn't warn you I was going to ask you this. If there was one key thing you want someone to take away from a governance conversation, they're an organization that doesn't have strong governance or is maybe getting pushback from above about creating a governance program, what is the one key thing you would take away, you would want them to take away?
Start, and I don't say this, I say it jokingly, but it goes back to, once again, governance is never done. So governance can feel overwhelming. There's so much to take into consideration. And I would say the number one thing you can do, start, whatever it is, put it out there on a wiki and just say, governance, here's the IT help desk phone number. Or here's this policy and a link to it. And then you can always add on to it. You can always change it. But in an organization that doesn't have governance, you can't feel like I have to go out and craft a 974-page document and I can't call it governance until it's done. Don't do that. Don't worry about what it's going to look like at the end. Start with what you can, identify one thing, and it will grow, because you're not the only person who sees this as a problem.
That's awesome. That's my new favorite thing. Just start.
It can feel overwhelming, and so often, we get tasked with things, be it at home, be it at work, be it as consultants, be it as parents or anybody. Like, how am I going to do this? Take the first step and write governance at the top of a Word document, and then get your friend and show him one thing that you can do. And now you've got a power user and a community. And that's really where it goes.
Nice. True story.
Hey, check this out. Hey, good job. You're a power user now. I love it. That's fantastic. Awesome. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope to our listeners that this was a good follow-up from last week, where we talked about a bunch of academic stuff, and just getting to hear from a consultant who's out there doing this every day, from the governance witch of all people. And hopefully, as we continue pushing through this series of buzzwords with the Buzzkill podcast, hopefully we can start. So
yeah, thanks again for your time today, Amanda.
Happy to do it. Thanks, guys.